Good evening. Bonsoir. Bienvenue à tous. My name is Subhashish Ghoshal. I'm the director of TICID. And tonight's event is hosted in partnership with our sister institution, Institut de l'Énergie Trottier at École Polytechnique, and is made possible by the generous support from the Trottier Family Foundation. This is the 11th edition of the event and the first in person since the pandemic. So we are very pleased that you could be with us tonight. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that McGill University is located on land. We have some ID issues. So I'd like to acknowledge that McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous peoples. To this day, the presence of indigenous communities marks this territory, and we are fortunate to be able to gather here, many of us from various parts of the world, to share ideas, hold conversations, and hopefully arrive at solutions for some of the pressing issues of our time. Tonight, we'll start with a couple of welcome remarks. This will be followed by a keynote presentation and then a panel conversation. We will reserve time at the end for questions from the audience. There are microphones at the back, so you have to weave your way through to them when the time comes, and we will tell you when that is. So with that, I would now like to invite Professor Viviane Yargeau, Dean of Engineering at McGill, to share some opening remarks.
Thank you, Subhashish. So good evening, bonsoir à tous. I'm proud to be participating in this year's edition of the Trottier Symposium. So it's my first one as Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to hear the speakers, and then the discussion that will follow will certainly be interesting as well. I want to thank the TICID team for putting together this event. So coming back to in-person is pleasant, but it's always a challenge to adapt to that transition. And seeing the crowd that we have, clearly they've been successful. So thank you to the TICID team. So today we gathered to explore some of the most pressing sustainability challenges. And these challenges include climate change, sustainable infrastructure, the energy transition, and they're all multifaceted and interconnected. And because of that, it means that we have to use an approach that is multidisciplinary and multifaceted so that we can really tackle these problems. And that's really at the core of what TICID is trying to do by bringing together the different perspectives. And today's event is clearly in line with that intent. And it's with this approach that we will be able to have impactful or meaningful impact in sustainability. Et pour réaliser des projets significatifs, on a besoin d'une approche qui n'est pas uniquement basée sur les défis environnementaux, mais également sur les défis économiques et sociétaux. Et c'est un aspect dont on va discuter aussi aujourd'hui. Donc, les solutions durables doivent être ancrées sur l'équité et la justice, pas uniquement sur des aspects environnementaux. Et c'est de cette façon-là qu'on va réussir à construire un avenir qui va être bénéfique pour tous et non pas seulement pour des privilégiés. C'est pourquoi l'approche qui est multidisciplinaire et collaborative qui est promue par TICID et par la faculté des génies va nous permettre d'approcher les problèmes avec cette perspective qui va nous permettre de contribuer de façon collaborative à résoudre ces grands enjeux. And universities and institutions like ours play a crucial role because we have the responsibility to educate the next generation. So we have to make that difference through our action, but through them as well. And I'm proud to share that TISED, a new master's program in sustainability and engineering and design, has been now in place, and we have welcomed the first cohort. So it's one additional tool that we have now to train in the next generation. So today's event is a crucial one. So the Trottier Symposium provides a platform for examining those global issues that we're facing, reflecting TISED's goal to engage different stakeholders and the support that TISED had, the participation to events to reflect that. So from the academic community to the industry to professional to the general public. So it's crucial to have those conversations together. So I want to thank each of you for being here today and being part of that important dialogue because sustainability is impacting all of us. So I encourage you to not only listen to what will be presented today, but to be engaged today and after leaving today's event, because we all have to be active participants for sustainability globally for all of us. So thank you.
So thank you, Dean Yarjo. I would now like to invite Ram Panda, who's one of TISED's founding benefactors, of course, with Mr. Trottier, who's here in the audience with us. So with that, over to you, Ram.
Good evening. I guess hurricanes bring a lot of bad news, but today I must say it brought us good news having Lorne here among us, because he was supposed to be in Florida for a big launch, which did not take place. So Lorne asked me to intercede on his behalf to say a few things. And looking at Lorne, and I said, Lorne, now I can just sit down and enjoy like everybody else. He said, no, continue with whatever you wrote. So, and here I am. First about Lorne, I have to always start with this invocation, I always call it, because I have known Lorne for better part of 55 years. A lot of you probably weren't even born. But with a much closer cooperation over the past 20 years through the Faculty Advisory Board at the engineering faculty and so many other things that succeeded after that. And TISED really came into being with the wonderful and generous gift of Lorne. So I'm here to celebrate 11 years later. So this is really a fantastic feeling of elation for me. And in all these years, of course, Lorne and I, we always kept in touch with all the goings on in the world and all the concerns that we all carry every day about what's happening around us. Because a lot of those issues really, truly affect our own survival, if not the survival of our progeny. And the TISED, as it occurs today, is really an incredible thing in terms of the 10-year record. Perhaps you didn't have a slide to show all the wonderful stuff that TISED did, which would have been actually very appropriate today. And but in his, I'm talking going back to Lorne, in his endeavors to addressing so many of these vexing issues, the unique thing is he's joined by his entire family. His wife, Louise, his daughters, Claire and Sylvie, and their spouses, Aaron and Eric. This is really and undoubtedly a very passionate family doing their very best for the society at large in numerous ways. I think this must be absolutely unique in Canada itself, as far as I can tell. Now, coming to today's symposium, I look at Victor and his little synopsis, and I was going to say, dark machines for dark days. Just kidding. And coming a day after a massive hurricane, Milton in Florida, the one word that's probably on everybody's mind is climate change. That's what it is. Everybody knows that. Science already has spoken about it. And we're actually seeing it in action. Because I think 20 years ago, when people were talking about this, it seemed more like a science fiction. They talked about sea levels rising, glaciers melting away, on all those things. Really, I recall, as a 20-year-old reading that, it did seem like science fiction. But now I didn't realize, I'm actually beginning to see some of those things really unraveling in reality. And this is really scary stuff. Now, if you go back to, let's say, a decade ago, perhaps the theme was more on energy efficiency and of bringing in more electrification to our society. So as decades progressed, we kind of latched onto one major theme that we saw was the one we should work on. But really, when we sit back and reflect, what we are seeing in terms of climate change or lack of biodiversity, extinction of species, environmental degradation, all of these things you can relate to because you're actually seeing them, either in small part or in large. They're really simply consequences of prolonged human actions and lack of sustainable practices. And that's how, when TISET came into being, the focus was really truly on sustainability, because then everything else will ultimately, hopefully, will get resolved over the decades ahead. The solutions cannot be simplistic. I mean, of course, we said elimination of fossil fuels from our lives will do it. Yes, it is an important and very important goal that we must achieve, but we also have to be holistic in how we go about getting to a sustainable planet. For example, we cannot forget that our manner of consumption itself is a huge problem. That must be addressed on as an equal footing while searching for simply science-based solutions. Like TISET's mandate was meant to be catalyzing in terms of bringing about awareness through support for education, research, and public fora. I think that the achievements have been fantastic over the past decade. Under the able guidance of Subhashish and great support from the dean, the faculty itself, and the participation of a large cohort of like-minded people, and I can see having a full house here, it's really, really remarkable. It has made a remarkable progress in this decade. Lorne and I wish, Lorne is here, of course, he's wishing in presence, in physical presence, and I wish TISET continued success.
So just to introduce our first part of the event, just add, like, our event tonight really delves into two issues that have been dominant headlines in the media and on many of our minds: the sustainability of our planet in the light of the many crises that were just mentioned in the opening remarks, and the recent spectacular developments and innovations in artificial intelligence. So today we seek to explore the nexus of these two issues and ask ourselves, what is the potential of AI to significantly accelerate the pace of solutions for combating climate change, to improve stewardship of nature, and drive impactful and just change towards a more sustainable planet? What are the possible pitfalls? Tonight we will hear from experts whose work attempts to address these very questions. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Victor Galaz. Victor is a professor in political science at the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University and director of the Bayer Institute's Governance, Technology, and Complexity program at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. He's author of the forthcoming book, Dark Machines: How Artificial Intelligence, Digitalization, and Automation is Changing Our Living Planet. His research explores the political and governance challenges created by rapid global change, including globally networked risks. In particular, he studies governance dimensions of planetary boundaries, the interplay between financial systems and Earth systems dynamics, and the sustainability implications of novel technologies. His presentation, as you can see here, is Climate Action in an Era of Dark Machines. And with that, please join me in welcoming Professor Galaz to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thanks, Tyson, for inviting me. I want to begin by introducing you to a dear friend of mine, Brian Arthur. I think he's in his 70s. He is a deep thinker when it comes to technology and how technology shapes economies and how technology shapes science. We invited him over to Stockholm in 2018 to a very small meeting. There were about 5 people in the room together with Brian, trying to figure out what does it mean that the world is becoming increasingly digitalized, automated, and machine intelligent. What does it mean for sustainability? And we started to talk in that little group. Everyone started to talk except for Brian. He was very silent, thinking deeply, as he always does. And after a while, I asked him, Brian, what's your take? Can you please enlighten us a little bit? What does it mean that we're moving into this highly digitalized, machine intelligent world? And he looked at me and he said, Victor, he always calls me Victor for a reason. It's Victor, but he says Victor. The future of our planet is an economy where machines talk to machines. And we all went silent for a moment. I looked at my colleague, Andrew, we were like, what is he talking about? And it took me a while to actually get what he meant. It took me about 5 years and a book. So I try to figure it out. So I'm going to give you an overview of what I think, what he meant, the future of sustainability in a world with machines talking to machines. And it's not a neat picture. It's a complex picture. And I'm going to begin just with a couple of examples of how I see artificial intelligence changing the prospects for sustainability, both for good and for bad. So here's my first example, flooding. Flooding is an extremely difficult scientific process, task to predict. There's limited data. It's not only about climate and weather, it's also about infrastructure, etc. A couple of months ago, I think it was at least this year, there was a study published where a team used open data combined with deep neural networks to try to predict extreme flood events. And they managed to do that for 80 countries, 7 days in advance, even in settings where that had little data. That's remarkable. It's going to allow us to adapt and respond to shocks much faster than we were able before. A couple of years ago, my colleague Jonas, and there's a QR code there for anyone who wants to read more in detail, he had been working on this island, small island outside in the Baltic called Stora Karlsö. And they had built the world's largest birdhouse to be able to monitor and count and weigh a seabird species called the guillemot. And the guillemots are, he calls them biological sensors, in a sense that depending on the population and behavior and weight of this seabird, you're able to say something about how the Baltic is doing, right? So the more you have of this species, or the bigger they are, or the types of behavior will tell you whether the Baltic is doing well or doing badly. So they built this huge birdhouse and put up cameras, and then they were all sitting down, noting manually, counting numbers, like counting the number of species and birds and picking them up and weighting them. And I said, Jonas, this doesn't make any sense. There's something called computer vision that you can use. You don't need to do this manually. And of course, this is what they did. So you see a video here. So they teamed up with an AI researcher who normally would work on self-driving cars to design this system where they could automatically monitor the population of this bird. They also built a very clever system, so small, where you can weigh these birds, and the computer vision algorithm allows you to detect what particular individual you have, and then it gives you the weight of that individual. Wonderful innovation, very clever way to combine AI with biological monitoring. There's another example that I love, and this is in the deepest of the oceans. This is the sperm whale. This is an image of a sperm whale, and a project called SETI. What they do is they use hydrophones, so that means microphones in the deepest oceans, to try to record communication between sperm whales. Sperm whales are huge. They're about 15 meters. They weigh up to 20 tons or maybe 30 tons, and they move in groups. They move all around in all of the oceans of the world. They are at threat of extinction. And what they managed to do was to discover that different groups of sperm whales communicated in different ways. They had their own dialects. So I'm going to just show you and give you a little bit of a sound sample of how different dialects sound for the sperm whales that they detected. So this is the first group. It's called codas. So that's one group. So you have two different dialects within this species. And you can imagine the work of trying to filter out all other noise to get to those particular clicks. I found that remarkable, that we're able to listen to another species. That's the beauty of AI. But then, of course, it's another side, the dark side of AI. And this video is from an article in, I think, MIT Tech Review, where a journalist looks into influencer marketing in China and how that happens online. And of course, influencer marketing is a big thing, not just in China, but also here. And what he had discovered was that these influencers increasingly became automated deepfakes. So what you're seeing here is not actually real people. These are deepfakes. So this allows a company to sell products 24/7 without even using humans to promote that. And what we're starting to discover the dark side of deepfakes and generative AI. And I want to say something about the carbon footprint and water footprint, because this has become a huge, huge topic lately. So some estimates, so if you do a search that you normally would use Google for or Bing, and you instead use a Gen AI tool, you consume about 10 more times more energy compared to a conventional search engine. If you generate an image using generative AI or ChatGPT, that is as energy consuming as charging a smartphone fully. Depending on where you live in the world, interacting with a generative AI system will consume about half a liter of water. So in Sweden, that would be 17 interactions would consume half a liter of water to cool down the servers that generate that information. There was one study, and the numbers are preliminary, but still interesting, that calculated that the amount of dark data produced by companies, and dark data, that's the data that companies just collect and then store away and probably never use again. I have a lot of dark data in my phone, which are going to be photos of my dogs or things that I have experienced that I will never use probably. I will never print them or look at them again. So companies generate about 1.3 billion gigabytes of dark data every day, which has a carbon footprint equivalent of about 3 million flights from London to New York. So individual seats, so not airplanes. These are all estimates. There's limited transparency in the industry. There are probably many things that you can question in the methods. But my point is that we normally take the cloud and things like this for granted. And we can see this happening. I'm pointing out Microsoft. All companies in this space have the same issue. Google, Amazon, or Alibaba have the same issue. So Microsoft had, and still has, I think, very ambitious climate goals. So the ambition was to go to net zero by 2030. Very vocal. Microsoft is has a very high profile on AI for climate change. But what's happening now, as we rush into creating bigger and bigger models and promote them and integrate them in more and more services, is that carbon footprint is increasing now in opposite. This is a huge challenge for these companies. And it is becoming a global challenge. So if we look into global projections, and again, these are estimates. So the International Energy Agency is estimating that the world energy use of data centers will become double by 2026. Estimates, again, that it might consume 6% of US energy use by 2026. And then water use globally, 1 trillion liters of water a year by 2027. All estimates. We don't know. I mean, technology will change for sure, and demand will change. These are all projections. But it has a local impact. Global projections have global impact. So nowadays, we're seeing something quite unique. We're seeing local environmental movements mobilizing against data centers. So this is one example from Montevideo in Uruguay. Another image from Cerrillos in Chile, which is where I was born, in Chile, against the Google Center, and also in Europe. So this is from the Netherlands. So this is moving fast. To me, I never thought this was going to be an issue, to be honest, 5 years ago. But we're starting to realize that whenever we think about the digital economy and cloud services, this is one key thing for me. Like the AI economy and the digital economy is not really a cloud anymore. It's a mine. It requires labor. It requires resources to produce the hardware. It requires energy, massive amounts of energy, growing amounts of energy, and also resources like water. So we should keep that in mind as a big, big challenge whenever we talk about AI for sustainability. Taking one step back, and the way I believe that some people think about AI and sustainability, normally we would think about it based on this, if you remember the AlphaGo many, many years ago. We think about it as something that is able to solve a specific task for us better than humans do. And then we think about it for energy or transport or housing or whatever. It's not incorrect, but I think that's a little bit too limiting. The way I look at it is beginning from the very basics. We live on a planet Earth. Planet Earth has a biosphere. The biosphere is the sum of all the world's ecosystems on land and in the oceans. Without a biosphere, and a living biosphere, a resilient biosphere, we're nothing more than a dead rock floating around in space. On that biosphere, we've built a massive technosphere. That's the sum of all technology that we have. A team from the UK, I think, sat down one day and managed to calculate the weight of the technosphere. 30 trillion tons. They used that number and then separated it into the amount of land surface we have. So what they came up with is that on each square meter of land surface on planet, we humans have built 50 kilos of technosphere. There was another study that showed that actually is a larger weight than all sum of organic life. What I find intriguing, and this brings me back a little bit to what Brian Arthur said with machines talking to machines. The technosphere is no longer a dead mass. It communicates, it sends information to other devices, to us. It nudges us into certain types of behavior. Whenever you use your phone and you count to see how many steps you've taken today, you have a technology nudging you into certain behaviors. So that's why it's impossible to talk about sustainability or a climate future a just climate future without recognizing the importance of the technosphere and the emergence of artificial intelligence. One of the interesting processes in this is what some scholars call infusion, and how artificial intelligence becomes infused into technology, so invisibly just enters. So in 2018, whoever had Instagram, the news feed on Instagram was just a very simple recommendation system, nothing fancy. By 2019, Instagram had infused a deep learning methods to steer what you see in your newsfeed. So that process, the invisibility of AI just becoming infused in technologies, I find fascinating, and also a reason why we should take it seriously. So whenever anyone talks to me and asks me, what is the impact of AI on sustainability? I always say you need to think about three things. First of all, the impact will be broad. It will impact all sectors that are important for sustainability. Education, transport, energy production, climate modeling, environmental monitoring, whatever you think about will somehow be influenced by AI. Some of that infusion will be silent. We will not even think about it. It will just happen. And it will also be deep. And this is the tricky one. So it will influence the way we relate to each other, the way we remember things, and at times also affect our emotional world. I'm going to give you an example of AI and how it connects to our emotional world. How many of you remember this little app that came a couple of years ago? Some of you are nodding. Yes, so essentially an app that used a neural network to transform an old image, whatever image you have, and made it move a little bit, right? So it added a little bit of motion in that. Not super fancy, quite simple AI application, but the impacts are quite interesting. So this is a video from TikTok. Just give me a minute. You're going to see what happens.
My God. Holy smokes. She's alive.
Yeah, it brings the picture to life.
Look at that smile. Oh, God.
That's your Lola. Isn't it amazing that technology?
I can't believe it. Oh.
Oh.
It's her.
Yeah, it's like she's here.
This past November 23rd, we would have been married 75 years. And I still love her.
I love her too.
So I just want you to reflect on this little thing briefly. Sorry to manipulate your feelings like this, but it's just to get the message through. It's a very, very simple AI tool using deep neural networks that triggers a very strong emotional reaction here for the individuals in the video. And this moves around in digital networks, flowing all around from TikTok and then into YouTube and then Facebook. And now we're here, sharing a collective emotional experience triggered by an AI. Of course, that to me is fascinating. And of course, as these technologies evolve, this will become even more important to keep in mind. It's not just about AI supporting rational decision making. It's also about AI influencing our deepest worlds and our emotions. And this is part of the digital economy. Maybe the young people here don't remember it, but a while ago, Facebook had just a few reaction buttons. At some point, that shifted into what we have today. Like, love, care, haha, wow, sad, and angry. That is a very intentional design to extract emotion data from users. That's another way to try to understand users. And this is a controversial field, I should say. I'm not sure. I mean, there are a lot of hype in this domain related to emotion AI. What we can say, however, is that many companies have tried and are trying this. So smart speakers, recording voices, and not only extracting information from voices, like factual information, but also some sort of sentiment analysis of what you're feeling at that stage. Spotify made an attempt to classify what you're listening to according to your mood for a while. That didn't work, but they tried. And then, of course, facial recognition technologies, as in that little video. Does it work? Probably not, but that doesn't mean that companies are not trying. There's a beautiful short novel called 24/7, very critical of how we've organized societies and how we've organized our economies. And the argument there is essentially that there's only one place where we as humans are being left at peace and no one is extracting labor or data from us, and that's when we're sleeping. So the argument is that sleep is a sort of revolt, which is a great movement that I'd be happily join. The problem is, of course, that that's not true anymore, right? And we do this voluntarily. That's how deep the digital economy goes into our world, and that's how deep AI goes into our world. Anyway, if AI is everywhere, what can we say? I mean, just adding, to me, this is one of the key challenges. I'd be happy to discuss it in the panel too. AI is extremely powerful, can do a lot of things, but it's also stupid many times. And one of the issues has to do with the data being trained. Just to give you a simple example, I just grabbed this from a social media platform, and the prompt in DALL-E, so one of these generative AI systems, please produce an image of a watch showing 1 o'clock. Be careful where the hands are pointing. What do the images show? It doesn't show 1 o'clock, it shows 10 past 10. And the reason for it would be, my guess, is the fact that every or many of the photos that you find online from stores shows watches that show 10 past 10, because it's an aesthetically pleasing way to show a watch. So there's a bias in the data that you feed into it, and of course you're going to get bias out. A very simple way to illustrate a much more important point, that whenever we use and train these systems, they will have bias. If the data has bias, which it tends to have, and if we use it to support decision making, you will get biased outputs. We haven't seen this very much in the climate domain or sustainability domain, but in other domains. So this study by ProPublica, this is an old study. It's not a very advanced AI system, it would be more an algorithmic system, but still shows machine bias in using these kind of systems for law enforcement. And in the healthcare system, this is a remarkable study published in Science in 2019 for a healthcare algorithm that they actually managed to open and understand, where they showed systemic bias against people of color in the provision of health resources in the US. We should keep that in mind. The question is, of course, and this is the challenge, and I'd be happy to discuss this with people who are more technically savvy than I am, will this improve with bigger models that have more data? I'm not sure. So this is a visual from Bloomberg, prompting the system to produce images of people within different categories. So give me a color photograph of a lawyer, or give me a color photograph of a janitor, give me a color photograph of a fast food worker. And you will consistently see racial biases and gender biases being reproduced. Is this fixable? And what does it mean? So we want to use these tools to support sustainability decision-making or climate decision-making. But on the other hand, if you look at examples in other domains, so in policing, law enforcement, social healthcare, or healthcare in general, you will see these biases. How do we mitigate these in advance and avoid making those mistakes? I think Frank Pascal is a lawyer, and he wrote a wonderful book in 2019, and in his contribution to the discussion about AI and accountability. And he talks about two waves in that debate. So the first wave of accountability, when we talk about accountability of AI, has the following question: can we make AI more transparent and accountable And can we refine AI to produce better results? I think a lot of people have spent a lot of time on that, including companies. What he argues is that we're moving into the second wave of accountability. Which systems do we need to build, even deserve to be built? Which problems do we need to tackle? And who is best placed to build them, and who decides? That's another form of discussion we need to have. There are lots of applications of AI for climate change action. I think, David, you and your team have done remarkable work in that domain to categorize it, systematize it, and they're all good suggestions. So I really recommend you reading David's work that has been published. The problem we're facing, and I know you agree with me, David, because we discussed this the other night, is the fact that we're building a bunch of other tools that are undermining climate action. And that universe of applications, I think, I don't have the evidence for it, is much, much bigger, much, much bigger. So AI for faster and cheaper extraction of fossil fuels, AI to generate climate mis and disinformation, AI to accelerate consumption patterns, etc. How do we make sure that we not only expand the green AI for climate action bubble, but also decrease the gray applications? I'm going to wrap up soon. I've been giving this talk several times, and people say, "You're so pessimistic." We need more hope. That's what I hear. And I am hopeful. I think actually I am hopeful. I think all the things I've talked about, all these worries, come from a place where I consider we can do much better than we're doing at the moment. So I'm hopeful too, but I use another definition of hope than people normally would use. And this is the definition by American author Rebecca Solnit. If you haven't read Rebecca Solnit, I can warmly recommend her. And she has a definition of hope. I'm just going to read it up very quickly, that I really like. And she says, hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. So hope is not a passive thing. Hope is something that you do. So now what? What do we do? Wrapping up. I'm going to do this quickly. If we wanted to direct innovation, we can do it. Some people call it mission-driven innovation. It requires governments to incentivize certain types of innovations. It's not going to come from the private sector itself. That would be my message. You need to steer innovation. We've done it before for other sectors. If we want to see really good AI innovation for climate change, there needs to be some incentivizing in there. I think we need to talk about not only responsible AI, which is a big topic, but also planetary responsible AI. There are good principles for accountability, transparency, participation, but we need to add the climate dimension to it, the biodiversity dimension to it, the planetary dimension to it. Think about the material footprint. And we need to talk about AI co-development in the hands of change agents. I think we need to find solutions that fit the realities of people dealing with climate change on a daily basis and ask them, what tool do you need to cope better with what we're seeing? Rather than designing these huge models that come from the top and say, hey, look what we got here, use it to whatever you want. I think that's a different approach to innovation that requires that we see people not as consumers, but as citizens. So that's what I bring with me whenever I think about Brian and when he says to me about the future of machines talking to machines. I think we can do better than that. I think we can do much better. And we can use AI for good stuff as well, if we want. So in the best case, I think really in the best case, we will be able to use AI to allow us to listen to nature in new ways. Let's see whether we can hear nature in this clip. There you go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Victor, for that presentation. I would now like to invite our other panelists to join Victor here on stage. So joining us are Professor Emma Frejinger from the Department of Computer Science and Operations Research at Université Montréal, where she's a Canada Research Chair in Demand Forecasting Optimization of Transport Systems, and also holds an industrial chair funded by the Canadian National Railway Company. And we also have here Professor David Rolnick, who is a Canada CIFAR chair at the School of Computer Science at McGill and Mila, Quebec AI Institute. His work focuses on applications of machine learning to help address climate change. Today, David has a double role, both as a panelist and as a moderator, to lead the conversation. So over to you, David.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for giving that. I guess, should we stand up? It feels a bit weird. It's nice comfy chairs. So thank you so much for kicking off the discussion in such a fantastic way. You've given us a lot to think about. I am really excited for the conversation, and I think that we had first a couple of minutes for each of us to introduce ourselves. I'll take a moment to talk about myself first of all. So I have a couple of different roles. I am an assistant professor of computer science here at McGill. And in that capacity, my work focuses on innovations in AI driven by problems in climate action and biodiversity change. And what motivates my group's work there is really thinking about how much AI we are building as a society now and how little that is driven by the problems that society most needs to be worked towards. And it's a subtle point because on the face of things, we can think, oh, well, AI is being innovated on in so many different ways, and we're trying to solve the really big problems. We're trying to understand truly what it means to speak and what an image really is, and build these big general purpose systems that can try to answer every question and solve every problem. And when you actually try to use those systems, often to solve your particular problem, they often don't work. And that's because sometimes by trying to solve every problem, you end up solving none of them really well. Which isn't to say that innovations in AI aren't driven by innovation for innovation's sake, aren't useful. But they're not enough to actually tackle the problems that we most need to solve as a society. And so use-driven innovation in partnership with people from outside of AI and technology is really fundamental to solving some of the problems that society most faces. And then the other hat that I have is I co-lead a nonprofit that I founded many years back called Climate Change AI, which helps to tackle the challenges that exist in the space of AI and climate that are needed to enable innovation and change. Problems like capacity building, and education. How do the communities that are reaching out desperate for knowledge about AI, they're coming from the energy community, what is this AI thing? They're coming from the biodiversity community. How do I use these tools to make a difference in my work? Or not, and vice versa. People from AI and tech who really want to work on problems that are relevant to society. How do we empower these people? Bringing different stakeholder communities together. And also in the policy space, where governments are increasingly interested in AI policy, regulation, facilitation. What role does climate have in that? And so these are some of the ways in which it's really necessary to help shape and inform different communities, and that's the other hat that I have. I'll turn it over to Emma now. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. So, and thank you for the presentation. Sorry?
Do you want to stand up?
Oh, is it fine? You hear? Okay, I'll just sit. So first of all, it's a privilege to be here tonight. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be able to speak to such an important topic. I think what we realized when we were talking in preparation for this panel is that we have quite a complementary expertise and different views on these problems. So I come from a place where my expertise is really problem focused. So like you said, not focused on solving all of the problems and developing AI for superhuman intelligence, but rather to solve very hard decision-making problems that we're facing in the real world today. So data-driven optimization, essentially it means that we're combining methodologies from econometrics, machine learning, and operations research with the aim to solve really hard decision-making problems and augmenting humans. Most of my work, there is a human in the loop. So you're trying to provide them better solutions and help them to find better solutions to their problems. I'm focusing extensively on applications. I'm passionate about applications and having an impact in the real world. Most of my applications concern transportation and supply chain management, so sectors that are contributing a lot to greenhouse gas emissions today. And that means that we're solving problems related to, say, fleet management, network design, infrastructure, investment planning, and so forth. But the key challenge there resides in that these problems, we have to find solutions, but subject to uncertainty. So this is really where the machine learning and AI perspective come into play. How can we characterize that uncertainty, and how can we reduce that uncertainty by making better predictions? So that's most of my research work is around that with applications. You mentioned the Canadian National, so I'm working with railroads, but also other companies. And since a few years, I'm also working as a scientific advisor for a Montreal-based company called the Vado Labs, where we're developing bespoke AI solutions for the supply chain in the industry. So a lot of that, and I think some of my comments will be really around adoptions. So how do we make a responsible adoption of these technologies in companies today to make a difference today? So that's a lot what my research and work is about. Thank you.
And I think, Victor, you've already given us a fantastic introduction, but if you'd like to add, okay. So I guess I'd like to dive into some concrete ways that, first, AI is being used to enable meaningful work in climate and sustainability. Zooming out a little bit, at Climate Change AI, we've tried to analyze the different ways that this is happening, and we're seeing, I guess, 5 main themes: taking big unstructured data sets and distilling them into useful information. So that could be the bioacoustic stuff that you mentioned. You mentioned work in pinpointing where floods are happening. That's not just in the research space, that's being deployed on the ground by the UN, for example. Gathering these big unstructured data sets and turning them into useful information that can guide on the ground work. We're seeing them in optimization, in the area of transportation, and in the area of, for example, reducing the energy use of heating and cooling systems in buildings and manufacturing. We're seeing improved forecasting, so reducing error in predictions for the supply and demand for electricity, already being used to reduce waste in electrical grids. We're seeing the use of AI in physics-based simulations to speed up physics-based simulations of climate and weather, and we're seeing AI being used to accelerate innovation in spaces like materials discovery, to design new catalysts, new photovoltaic cells, and other kinds of applications. Maybe we can, each of us, dive into a couple of applications that we're excited about, just to make this as concrete as possible. Let's just start out, Emma.
Should I start?
Okay. Please.
Yeah, no, I think I mentioned a few ones. I think what pops up in my mind are like, what are the AI innovations we should be seeing we're not seeing? And I think, so those are the AI climate change innovations that could potentially have a big systemic impact. Some of you might be familiar with Donella Meadows' work on leverage points. So for example, where is the AI climate change innovation that would allow us to phase out fossil fuel subsidies as quickly as possible? You know, I mean, I mean, it's at that level where I would love to see more tangible AI innovation. I love the collaborative projects to monitor biodiversity. I think it's great if we can optimize energy grids, et cetera, but are they really going to have the system effect that we need as fast as possible? So that's what I'm asking all the time, and that's why I sound so critical, sorry.
Well, right now, AI is being used to enable more oil and gas exploration and extraction. It's leading to a 5% production boost, $500 billion in additional profit for the oil and gas industry just by 2025. So I think maybe we're building tools the other way. I know you've gone through a bunch of examples in your talk, and I would love to hear about a couple of examples from your own group's work, sort of really diving into what the role is on the ground, how are you working across different disciplines to make this kind of change happen?
Yes, so I think maybe one way to look at it, what I'm sort of excited about, very briefly, it would be like doing more with less. And so, I don't know, let's take a concrete example. Have you ever been stopped of a train, like at a train passage, and you stand there, or you sit in your car and you're just waiting for the train to pass? Here there are long trains, in Sweden they are shorter, but here they're you can stand there for a while, and sometimes you look at these, they go by, and you see empty rail cars. Sometimes long, like some are nodding, so you definitely saw these, right? Or you have containers on them, and then you see there's one container, and then they're double stacked, but then there's only a single one. Sometimes you can even see locomotives. You stop and it's just one locomotive coming. It doesn't even pull anything. It's just going along. This is waste. These are inefficiencies. We have inefficiencies in our systems today. We are producing products that are never consumed. Vehicles are traveling along like trucks, about between 10 to 30%, depending on the statistics. They are traveling empty or almost half empty. If we're looking at our public transportation systems, how many has seen a half empty bus going around? Okay, these are problems that we have today with severe inefficiencies and where we actually have technology and AI to solve them. Why aren't they solved better now? It's because when you need to commit to a plan, right, you need to plan your fleet, or you need to plan which trains to run, you don't know exactly what is going to be the demand. I'm going to produce my products, but I don't know how much is actually going to be consumed or where there will be a demand for that. The same goes for electricity. We can look at this at many places. So what I'm excited about is to leverage predictions and data and be able to solve these very hard problems, which I could speak a long time about why these are hard problems, but solving the train schedule for the Canadian National, say, that operates hundreds, almost thousands trains per week, that's not an easy problem, right? That's very hard, what we call combinatorial optimization problem. But today, we have algorithms that can find a lot better solutions. And what found in our group is that we can transport the same amount, but with 5 to 10% less locomotives, traveling 10 to 15% less kilometers, with the same thing. Now, when you add new vehicle technology, so how do you transition? We're talking a lot about the promise of green technology, but actually companies today then have to be able to integrate and have a transition period. And these also put more strength on the sort of challenges in how to operate these transport networks and the supply chains. So more agility, using predictions to come up with better plans. This is really what I'm very excited about.
Fantastic. And I can give an example of some of the work that we're doing in my own group in biodiversity monitoring, which follows up on and stuff that Victor brought up. And the motivation there is, if you look at a map of where we have data on the Earth's biodiversity, it is shocking how empty it is. The vast majority of the world is just black, no data. And if you zoom in on the parts that do have data, which is often North America and Europe, you see that actually even there, it's mostly black. But there's a lot of data right where people are. And it's not that we have the most biodiversity in cities, it's that that's where there are observers. And that's the case because both the professional scientists and the amateurs don't have the ability to go everywhere and see everything. And it just gets worse if you think about how many species there are. That's the data that we have for well-studied species like birds. But half the world's biodiversity is insects. There's something called the windscreen effect, where people just recently realized, oh, there are fewer bugs hitting my windscreen than there used to be. And this is the tip of the iceberg. This is the way that we noticed as a society that in some places 90% of all insects are gone. And that's why 90% of all insect-eating birds are gone in those places. And that's why pest species are taking off, because they don't have the natural biological control mechanisms. And we don't have any data to measure any of this. And so AI-based technologies are one piece of filling those gaps, because AI is good at doing stupid things fast. It's good at taking a simple task and scaling it up across the whole world. And so we're building AI-enabled sensor systems you can put out in remote locations that can give you millions of images of, in our case, we're focusing on insects, again, half of all biodiversity, and work out what the biodiversity is there. We're also working on remote sensing tools that can look at a habitat from above and estimate where the rare species are going to be, so you can go out in the field and target your interventions appropriately. But this is the kind of thing that AI can do at scale because there aren't enough people and there aren't enough experts for it to fill these kinds of gaps. I want to dive into a question asked all of our panelists. I think that the word AI has been used a lot lately, and it probably conjures up a lot of different things in your mind, right? Emma, I think I'm right when I say you're not just like asking ChatGPT how to fill the trains better, right? So what does AI mean to you?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think we have media to thank for people being aware of AI, but we also have media and maybe the breakthroughs in generative AI a bit to blame for maybe quite a narrow view of what AI can do. And in particular, I think when we talk about sustainability, that I don't personally believe that ChatGPT will have, like, if we look at the net benefit for our planet or for sustainable futures. So when I think about AI in my work and a more broader definition, what we often people think about that is a synonym with AI is machine learning, right, or generative AI. So everything that has to do with the predictive or generative AI. For me, that is a necessity. Like, if we have uncertainty that I was mentioning before, we need that to characterize the uncertainty and to make predictions, but it's insufficient. So for me, the change comes from what do you do with that information, right? AI can give me information. If I can reduce uncertainty, that's information. If I can make predictions about what is going to happen in the future, you mentioned 7 days, right? I can predict flooding 7 days. Okay, now what do you do with that information, right? How can you make a change in the world so that you can evacuate? Like, what are the decisions that you need to make? If I can predict how many containers the Canadian National needs to transport between all of the origin and destinations that they serve over the coming 14 days. Okay, now what do I do with that information? And for me, that is really the key. And so what is necessary is to have this decision-focused perspective. At least that's my view. And that's where optimization and operations research come into play. So for me, AI is more broad. It's the integration of different methodologies. And I think it would be very beneficial if we could focus more on the problems and less on the technology.
Can I add something to that? I mean, being in this environment, like multidisciplinary academic environment, I think we have a huge responsibility here. Just to add to what you're saying, first of all, many of the problems we're seeing today, sustainability problems, are not necessarily monitoring or prediction failure problems. They're response problems, right? I mean, we need to be very clear on that. Amazing if we can get better biodiversity data, but there are many things that we can do already now to tackle the biodiversity crisis, right? So let's respond to the projections we already have. The other thing is that we need strong independent academia to fact check and reality check a lot of the AI hype we're seeing now. I think the need is big, and especially in the AI climate sustainability domain. Is this really going to work? You know, is it working? What's the data? What's the evidence? Can this be improved? And the trickiest part of this, as I've come to discover, the direct effects of these applications are easy to assess, like, you know, like energy optimization. Okay, we're gonna get 10% down on carbon emissions. But the secondary effects are much more difficult. Like, what would happen down the line? What will happen when people respond to this tool and use it in ways that we didn't really predict? Or this technology is so expensive, so maybe just this particular group affords to buy it, but not the other group. What are the dynamics that will change in society? So the secondary effects we need to keep track of as academics, because no one else will do it for us.
No, absolutely. Is it still working? Yeah, great. I think that this really goes to show the many different ways that what things that AI can mean and ways that tools can be integrated into societal systems, and the emphasis really being on thinking critically about what different users need and building the tools to match those needs. I want to turn to some of the pitfalls now, which we've already been seeing raised throughout the discussion. And what do you see as what we can be doing right and wrong? What's needed in order to make AI in the context of sustainability impactful? And also I'll throw out the word equitable, which has been sort of lurking in the background through a lot of these conversations. I'd like to go first.
Do I go? Okay. It's the middle seat that has the privilege. So if you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have answered like technology. We just need better technology to be impactful. We need good solutions. And I think when it comes to controlling, you were talking a lot about biases, like means to address that, I think still is a technology question. But impact is about adoption, right? And so for the types of problems that I focus on, so in sectors that are not high tech, more like supply chain, transportation, more our classical, or like more traditional industries, in order to have an impact, it has to be adopted. It doesn't matter how good the solutions are or how much savings we can have if we would not have an impact without the adoption. And so working with, like developing bespoke solutions and working closely with companies, I come to realize the importance of really focusing on the users, making something that is relevant to them, that they can trust. The types of problems we're solving are really hard, so typically they're very experienced humans who are solving those problems now, and we want to augment those humans so that they can make even better decisions, be more agile, find solutions faster, especially as climate change, it puts some more pressure on being fast to adjust to new events. And so I think, first of all, it's really like the first part, impact, and focusing on users and adoption. This would be my my part. And then those users also have very good feedback as to what is trustworthy, making sure that the results of our AI solutions are explainable, robust to changes, and so forth. So I think that it would be very helpful to many of us to focus on problems and on users, and make them adopt AI on problems where we can actually have a positive impact for the sustainability.
3 things very quickly. First of all, I think we need to expand our notion of the climate to include more things than just carbon emissions. Has to be forest, oceans, biodiversity. I mean, look at the Earth system as a whole. That's why I talk about the biosphere all the time. That to me is key to widen the view a little bit. The other thing, and you will find this obvious, but it's very difficult, interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity when we talk about AI. We need to get computer scientists and biologists and political scientists to work together in a serious way. Academia has a lot of work to do there to make sure this happens. That's the second thing. And the third thing is a little bit more sense of urgency. I think we got it a little bit in the opening, but it is urgent. I mean, we're a little bit in a hurry to make sure that the solutions we develop work, you know, and really get us down to net zero and plus biodiversity, etc. So a sense of urgency as well.
You already, both of you, brought up most of the things I was going to say. Yeah, I think everybody you talk to in the space is going to come down to interdisciplinarity and partnership. It's absolutely key. And for me, the biggest danger in this space is techno-solutionism, going in thinking that technology, AI especially, is going to come in and save the day. And there's, you know, I'm an AI researcher, right? My field has tons of hubris. We're so good at this, going into other fields and thinking, A, we're going to solve the problems. B, we know what the problems are. And it's really important for the problems not to be defined by the people solving the problems, right? Like, here's an example. I mentioned that insect work. We found that, not surprisingly, there wasn't enough data for a lot of species of insects to be developing the AI algorithms. And so we had to come up with new ways to pull in data. But that challenge actually ended up with an advantage. By working with our partners, we ended up realizing, oh, well, actually, part of the problem is that 90% of insects haven't been discovered yet. And so now we have algorithms that can help discover new species where there is no data. And this was solving a problem that wasn't apparent to us from the outset. And so this is one of those examples where it's really important for the problems to be user-driven. And then I'll throw that into the equity piece, because oftentimes AI tools do not have very equitable user bases, and are not being driven by a broad range of communities, geographies, different stakeholder communities. We see the kinds of problems that are being focused on being very much those that are, you know, relevant to Silicon Valley, and relevant to certain, like, there are problems like locusts that aren't getting as much attention as wildfires. And that's because there aren't locusts in North America, right? There are problems, there are techniques that are being developed to fight these problems, which are reliant upon having massive computing infrastructure, which isn't the case for even public agencies in Canada, let alone small communities in the global south. And so what is being defined as the problem and what is being defined as the solution is very much like influenced by the set of people who are empowered to make a difference. And so I think that that's another ingredient that I want to throw into the mix here. Let's pivot to another set of questions, which again return very much to your talk, Victor. So AI and sustainability are often linked in ways that aren't as simple as like AI can be applied to forecast storms or optimize electrical grids, or AI systems directly use energy. Can you walk us through, maybe going around, a way in which the design and use of AI systems implicitly affects sustainability, both either positively or negatively, without being really explicitly aimed at sustainability? And how can we shape AI systems with such effects on sustainability in mind? Go for it.
Do that really difficult question first. Yeah. No, I think, I mean, one application would be uses of AI in the insurance sector, like combining satellite imagery with deep learning to better see what's happening on the ground, to reassess insurance risks and to see how things are moving on the ground. I think that could have big sustainability impacts, because a lot of these climate risks are not properly priced for, would be my assessment. So if putting those tools, so satellite imagery, deep learning in the hands of the insurance sector and investors, I think will have big positive sustainability impacts.
Okay. I'd be interested in talking maybe offline about the complicated ways that sustainability and insurance are related, right? Like, there are ways that people are getting into big trouble because insurance providers are no longer covering them, right? Like, AI is being used to exclude people from insurance coverage right now. You can argue that that's good for sustainability, bad for those people, and no.
I mean, but suddenly then governments get a more realistic assessment of what the damage is really of what we're seeing.
That's
right?
true.
And need to step in a different way.
Yeah.
That to me would be better than having no knowledge or having it fully unpriced. But I mean, of course, I see that concern too, of course.
It's tricky, it's tricky. Emma, do you want to?
Yeah, so referring again to the applications I'm familiar working with, I see sort of two positive effects without them being really the objective. And actually, I do think it's important to identify those and actually target use cases where you have a win-win, right? Because often the organization you're working with have a particular objective. So the organizations, some of them that I'm working with are for-profit organizations, and so one of their objectives is cost minimization, right? So I can think about transportation, like we want to minimize cost. Well, a side benefit is that typically when you're minimizing costs, your vehicles are also more adapted to what you actually need to transport, and they are traveling less kilometers, and so they're emitting less. So if you permit me to have a very narrow sustainability sort of focus,
okay.
and we're focusing on the emissions, I would see that still as a benefit, and I think that is an example of such a one. The other one is that we're talking a lot about the compute that we need to train models, but then I think, again, we need to focus on sort of the Gen AI and like the generalization that they need to solve any tasks that require a lot of data. Now, those types of tasks are quite static, classifying images. The images don't change that much over time, or like a bird is a bird and so forth. In the supply chain and transportation industry, the environment is changing a lot, right? It can be changed to market conditions, the competitive landscape, and so forth. So it's a highly dynamic and non-stationary environment. And that means that even if we have a ton of data, typically only the most recent one has any value, right? So you're in a small data setting, and that has an implication that we need less compute. And so that would be sort of my second benefit, maybe, on using AI on like smaller data.
Yeah, and it often also works better, we find. Like, smaller algorithms are not just more usable by more people, but they're also often just better than the bigger algorithms. I want to throw in something to the mix also about, I think people tend to think of the impacts of technology as sort of inevitable, like what will happen, as if this is something that we're forecasting without agency, whereas what do we want to have happen and what are the options is maybe the right way to frame it. And here's an example. Self-driving technology is thought of, I think now, very much in terms of self-driving cars. That's what's in the news, and that's what a lot of the algorithms are being built for. That is expected to make climate change worse, because it will lead to more people driving, because even if each mile driven becomes a little bit more efficient, it's making it easier for people to drive. Now, this isn't necessarily bad, right? It may have benefits for public safety and various other things. But what if we incentivized public transportation with self-driving technology built in? Right now, governments are incentivizing self-driving personal vehicles. We have the option to incentivize a whole range of different things. And this is a choice where we can use the same technology in lots of different ways to have different impacts on society and different impacts on sustainability. And we get to choose. Those are the choices that we make individually and collectively. I think that one of the things that we've been dancing around a lot, and which you maybe gave a strong opinion on in your talk, is AI overall going to help or hurt the climate? Or is that the wrong question altogether? Maybe we can have this controversial discussion. Are you going to disagree on this? You said it's going to hurt the climate, and it's going to hurt sustainability. Is that right?
Unless we do exactly what you said, try to direct its development. I think, I mean, at some point, and I feel sympathy with that opinion, but I don't think it's right, is that, I mean, you have technology on one side and politics on the other side. Keep them separate. But to me, and because of my political scientist, technology is politics, because it distributes benefits, it distributes risks, it puts some people in one position compared to another. It's unavoidable that we somehow influence technological development. So my short answer is yes, unless, I mean, it's not going to take us where we want to be sustainability-wise or climate-wise, unless we find a way to redirect those forces.
Emma, what do you think? Is it going to hurt or help the climate and sustainability?
Yeah, so you said, is that the right question at all? And I do think it is a good question. I do think it requires some debate. You're clearly a very smart guy, so I totally agree with you.
So we just defer to you.
Yeah. No, but to be more serious, I think at this point in time, and I saw the big, like your circles at the end, I think at this point in time for sustainability, the net benefit is not there, definitely, and far from it. Is there potential for it to have a positive effect? Definitely. I am concerned about the human behavior and the adoption, and I do believe that it requires really regulation policies and a legal framework, as with any technology or like in the world we're living. But I think we're maybe lagging behind because the progress has been so fast. But I do think that there is a lot of potential, and I do want to be optimistic, and I have hope in your in the definition that you were quoting, which was a very good one, I think. So I do have a hope, and I'm ready to do a lot of work, but it would require a lot of work. Yeah.
We're not actually going to disagree on this, unfortunately. I hope this would be a really controversial question. We'd be coming from opposing sides. I am going to say, though, I think that despite the fact that I asked that question, I think it was the wrong question. Well, in the sense that I think that if you had to answer, is it making climate change worse or better? Is AI making climate change worse or better? It's definitely on balance making climate change worse. But I think that oftentimes people don't realize that you can have one dimension without the other dimension. Like when you talk about the energy use of AI, those AI systems are not the AI systems that are making climate change better. Those are the AI systems that are being used to do, I mean, I actually don't know what. Like 50% of US investment is in now Gen AI and like making chatbots for everything. Is that actually doing anything for society? I think it's just because people like chatbots. But we don't necessarily have trade-offs. And sometimes we can be going down several routes at once. And I think we could be in a world where the balance was very different. So to close off, before we turn to audience questions, I want to ask another sort of elephant in the room question, which I think will actually be pretty quick, having talked to the panelists before. People talk about existential risk from AI systems. What about existential risk? Is AI going to kill us all?
So I can go first on that one. So I would say we have a lot of uncertainty in the world, and so with uncertainty comes risk. I'm much more concerned about the risks associated with climate change than existential risks. And then when we looking at the sense of emergency to act, I think that it would be better to act to get benefit from this technology than worrying about more longer-term existential things. So I have hope in that regard, and so that would be my take.
I mean, I'm not a Nobel laureate, but I totally second that. I just find it fascinating as a social scientist to see how that conversation about existential risks of AI has consumed so much political energy and media frenzy, etc., while all these other issues that we know are tangible risks of applications of AI in social welfare services or health sector or whatever just get minimum. But I mean, it's getting better, to be honest, but it's just fascinating.
Yeah, people don't talk about surveillance as much now. They talk about Terminator scenarios. And I mean, I spend enough time looking at AI systems making really, really stupid mistakes and thinking, oh my gosh, how can I just prevent them from getting everything wrong? That it feels very far away before we have a system that does anything that like I want it to do, let alone taking over the world, right? So I'm exaggerating a bit here. Of course, we have AI systems that are deployed everywhere, but they're very narrow. They're trying to solve specific tasks. They're not anywhere close to a Terminator scenario. And so, you know, I'm glad that there are people considering those risks, but climate change is here and now and killing people and going to kill many more people. So I think we're all on the same page there too. Sorry that there isn't more controversy. I know that makes the panel more exciting. Maybe you can all ask some controversial questions. I think it's time for some audience participation. There should be microphones in the back. If we can see some hands, I'm sure there are people who want to weigh in. Great.
So thank you for that great discussion. And please find your way to the microphones at the back. I would please request you to keep your questions short and direct so that we can get to more questions in the allotted time that we have.
Hi. Yeah, thank you all for the conversation today. It's really helpful to see all that expertise and exciting to see so many people gathered in one room with the prompts of like, okay, solve a global issue, quick, we have like 2 hours, right? But one thing that I feel like has not been brought up yet in this discussion, or that it's at least been danced around, is the underpinning of the current climate crisis that we're in. And it's something that ecologists have been talking about for a while, which is our relationship with the Earth and the way we relate to the planet. It's been warned about, like there's a book I'm reading from 1990 where they're already concerned about this issue. And we talk about how we relate to insects, for example, like the windshield effect, right? We are experiencing the environment through a windshield, and does seeing AI generated data of biodiversity give you the same feeling as like walking through a field and looking at an insect, right? Like it's not the same, it doesn't have that same effect. So AI, this is maybe just anecdotal, it almost feels like I already have big mittens on when I'm going and interacting with the environment. Is AI just mittens on mittens on mittens? Like, is it further removing me from that experience and that relationship that's necessary to sort of reframe how we see our relationship with the Earth? Because that sort of, I just feel like it was danced around tonight. So I feel like if you could elaborate, if you guys have views on how AI will impact our relationship with the Earth and the planet and not just the applications of it, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
It's a great question. Which of us is brave enough to tackle it?
I think it's a brilliant question, and I think partly of why I included the example of the sperm whale and the AI systems that allow us to listen to it is to connect to that dimension. And I think that has been underdeveloped in the AI for climate or sustainability space. How can we use these tools to allow us to connect closer to the non-human world? I've seen a couple of interesting projects exploring that, but that's not the same thing as projecting where it will go. I'm very afraid of what you're saying will happen, that it will just put us further and further away. Like even in farming, the knowledge of farmers moving into digital farming might lead to the loss of local ecological knowledge of the farm, because everything comes datafied into a vague system. But there's very little research on that. I'd like to say the evidence is very, very limited, and I've looked around, but definitely a very important area to look at.
No, I think we have a bunch of questions. So
I don't think. Oh, hello.
It's a great question.
Hi.
We'll have to talk about it
thank
more
you.
later.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for your talk. I have a very quick question. It kind of links the benefit and the policy regulation that was spoken about. I loved the slide on the Microsoft showing how they have big climate goals, but using AI and sustainability is increasing their footprint. So when we talk about regulating AI usage, is there a metric that we can use to help implement regulation such that we have measures such as just energy return on investment or just return on investment in general? How can we quantify this investment in AI use, both money and energy, to then what are we getting out of it to measure what's the net benefit, if any benefit at all, which I think there is a benefit, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like you've done more work on this.
I'll give you one. There's something called science-based targets that the private sector is working with. Those are very specific. Companies can follow them and implement them. That's very clear. You can use many, many fancy metrics to get to it, but at the end of the day, it has to be a reduction of carbon footprint. That's measurable, right? I mean, you can come up with different other measures, but in the end, that's what counts. That's what the climate system cares about, whether emissions are going down. So yeah, it is possible to make that.
Thank you.
I loved the talk. It was really good. And I've also really liked the panel, especially the elephant questions. I have another elephant question to add. I was kind of wondering, like, when we talk about the axe holders, when it comes to AI and sustainability, who do you picture as the axe holders? Like, going back to the Microsoft example and like the emissions going up, or even just like people protesting like data centers and the energy that they take. Like, how do we, like, who would we say? I mean, I think it's like a collective issue with like taking climate action, but like, how do you see that proceeding? And like, is there onus on people in artificial intelligence to talk more about it? Is it ownership on like politicians to be more proactive towards that than capitalism? Like, where should we be going towards?
I think I'll jump in on that question. I think it's a really great one. And I think that there's this perception that AI change is driven by like the tech company big names. And in practice, a lot of that is not true. Using AI to do a thing is generally done by the people who are going to do the thing anyway and want to do it faster using AI. And that does not mean Google decides that it wants to solve this problem using its best-in-the-world AI, and so it uses its best-in-the-world AI to solve that problem. Don't get me wrong, innovation by tech companies is useful, but most of the change happens by an energy company that decides to use AI, or a public agency that needs to respond to crises, and can use a technological tool to speed up its work. And that means that the work gets done better because it's integrated into the real systems that are already on the ground, rather than sort of parachuting in and trying to use technology. And it's also more sustainable because, you know, the big entities, their attention wanders. And so in order to actually have change happen in an ongoing way, you have to have these smaller entities do that. And I think that that's a change in perception that often needs to happen. And there needs to be capacity building to match it. So ability to educate entities that need to use AI in certain contexts about when it is and is not relevant and how to do that. Yeah.
Can I add one more actor into the mix of who can make, I think investors. As investors become more aware of the carbon footprint, because transparency will be needed here in terms of carbon footprint and water footprint, investors are going to become concerned. And a lot of these investments is your money, actually. like your pension funds, for example. So I think that will make a difference. But we need all other change agents to act as well. But I think investors are there. They will be able to make a quick tip, I think.
Emma, do you want to weigh in on this elephant?
I would have loved to say that the political system and the people who are electing, but at this point in time, no. So I think this is a great question, and it's a very complex one. And I think that it is not possible to find one lever that would make a big difference. I think there are many different ones. What I was thinking was quite dark in my head as I was listening to you, because I think what we're faced with is polarization and a lot of influence from social media and the lack of critical thinking, especially among people who have not yet developed fully their critical thinking, and their education is definitely important, but also our own impact on our immediate environment to challenge thoughts and perceptions. And so I think that we have to also look at our individual responsibility here.
No, definitely. I think they're really great answers, and thank you for answering the question.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk and for the panel. My name's Ashley Bach. I'm doing a master's in mechanical engineering, and when you're talking about big solutions and action-driven things, I'm super excited by it, especially by AI. But at the same time, it's a new technology that is growing very, very quickly, but still quite immature. So we've been seeing that, obviously, like you were talking about, the biases, the extra energy consumption, but also like hallucinations. And these can lead to pretty significant problems, well, problems to the problems that we're actually trying to solve. So my question is, who do you think should be responsible for the outputs? And what can that person do to mitigate the natural, but also the pretty big consequences that could come from using an immature technology?
Well, yeah, so this is again another great question. I do believe a lot in accountability, and I think here probably, again, an interdisciplinary approach is required for people who understand how the algorithms work, but also people who understand the legal frameworks that we have. I think that some of the issues that you're alluding to, like hallucinations and so forth, depend on the AI technology that you're using. So when I'm with a company and they say, I want to price my products and I want to use Gen AI for that, I would be like, oh my God. Like, no. But there are people who are actually considering that, asking a chatbot to price. And so I think it's a responsible use of the technology, not only developing a technology that is also robust and responsible. And I think it comes with accountability, because if we can actually price products with a chatbot that gets its data, I don't know where, that becomes an important issue. And I was part of a panel on data scraping with lawyers, more like on the legal framework, and these are still open questions, how to deal with that, because the technology is not only the models and the algorithms that it used, it's also the data it ingests, and where does that data come from? And so this is something we've not been talking so much explicitly about, but these are very complex issues, and where is the accountability then? And so I think this is, when you're going to build new solutions, I think this is something that companies need to think about, and that we do think about as a computer scientist as well, not to take code just anywhere and put in a software. There are repercussions for doing so, and so we need to broaden that a bit more.
Do we have time for one more question? I don't know how many questions. I've lost track of time here.
I guess we've done 2 here. Yeah, let's go for one more on each side.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm an administrator here at McGill for this Computing Systems Initiative. One of the biggest challenges that we face is in academia, as you obviously know, is that we deal with a lot of silos. Everybody's working in silos, and I was wondering, especially in computer science, it's so focused on the technical aspect and not enough on the philosophy and ethics aspect. I was wondering, in your experience in academia, what can we administrators do to break these silos and, I don't know, merge the technical and the ethical together? Thank you.
So I can give an example to make this huge problem concrete. I was recently in a conversation with an AI person and a lawyer, and we were talking about AI and law, the intersection of those two. And the AI person said, well, you know, it's really interesting because a lawyer is going to have a really tough time understanding the technical details of AI, but an AI person can pretty easily pick up law. AI people generally don't even recognize that social science exists and have a habit of like reinventing principles from social science badly. So
they would love you if they're here.
The people who would be here would probably already know that. But I think that and this is not everybody, to be clear, and again, I'm a computer scientist here. So I'm hugely ignorant about things as well, that the field just as a whole is not educated in. I think we need to be changing curricula for students. I think we need to be teaching students that the impacts of their work are not somebody else's problem, and giving them the ability, the tools to understand those impacts from many different perspectives, not just from an engineering perspective. And I think there needs to be explicitly interdisciplinary education. There also needs to be greater value placed upon that kind of work within the field, because the incentive structure right now is such that, you know, building technologies is much more incentivized than analyzing those technologies and understanding, designing for particular kinds of impact. Does anybody, do you want to add anything there?
You said the word that I was going to use, incentive structures. I think it's the same thing when we're talking about adoption of AI, like how do we make users use it? It's the incentive structure of the organization. If we're looking at the academic sort of world, what is the incentive structure? If you want to try to do an interdisciplinary project, people will want to publish that work because that's how researchers are evaluated. And so what is the incentive structure there? The incentive structure is definitely not to go towards the type of work that you were alluding to in interdisciplinary work. So I think there's things to do there, and it goes also for the academic cycle, like how to incentivize instructors. We had a discussion earlier, how to incentivize instructors to dare to go a bit outside of their comfort zone and their specific area of expertise. I think this is something that is a challenge for the academic sector as a whole.
But it's totally doable.
Yeah.
I think we do it all the time. In the 80s, there was no way you could get an ecologist and an economist to work together. It was very unusual. Now we have a field called ecological economics. So, and there are journals where you can publish, and this kind of thing people do all the time. So there is hope, but you need to invest in it. It takes time, it takes commitment, and yes, there needs to be slight reforms within academia to make this happen.
Yeah. And it needs to come from both directions as well. There also needs to be integration of computer science and AI literacy into other areas, because that's needed too. And I want to call out the field of AI is really good about making certain things, certain forms of accessible. There is very much an open science culture in AI, which is just hugely useful to this, and I think that we can build on.
Last question.
Last question, okay. Thank you for the presentation, first of all. My question was to do with the energy intensity and associated carbon footprint of AI. So you're speaking about the transportation sector and how we can use AI to optimize transportation routes. If you are using AI, which has the associated carbon footprint, has emissions associated with it, and you're optimizing the route, which reduces emissions, is it really going to be a net positive? And can we quantify this? So I was thinking, for example, if you're transporting a renewable fuel across Canada, and you have, obviously, you've calculated the carbon intensity of that fuel over the life cycle, can we use the life cycle analysis to see if, if the AI use for that supply chain of that fuel is actually going to make it less renewable or improve the renewability of that fuel?
So I think the first part of your question is easier to answer maybe than the whole life cycle, like the specific sort of type of goods that are transported. I would say, without a doubt, the types of benefit, like reductions that I see in terms of distance traveled and the change in terms of the vehicles that are needed for transportation, and the types of algorithms that we're using to solve those problems, without a doubt, there is a positive, net positive, without a doubt, because we're not doing that with Gen AI for sure. And so what we're using is really CPUs for the combinatorial optimization part, and we're using predictive algorithms that are running on relatively small data, trained on relatively small data. So I would tend to say, and I'm looking at you, maybe you've quantified this before, but it's negligible in terms of the compute that you require to train those models and solve those problems.
You can measure it. I mean, like, when you're looking at like big Gen AI systems, you might be looking at hundreds of billions of parameters, which is a pretty terrible proxy for amount of energy usage. We recently built a system that is now in use to help governments monitor agriculture around the world from satellite imagery. And we needed to make it maximally scalable. So the number of parameters that you need to tune for your particular application there is not 100 billion, it's 100. And the reason why, and it's actually better than the really, really big algorithms because we designed it to build in structure from the data. And the reason why it's better is because it does use that structure from the data. And also, it's because you need these things if they're going to be used in practice to be scalable. And often that goes along with lower energy usage. So I think that there really isn't a trade-off in most of these cases, even if certain big AI systems that are used for other kinds of things can absolutely have a big footprint.
Good question, though. I would say a net negative to playing around with making videos of cats that are like deepfake. That's a net negative.
Thank you. So that almost concludes our evening. Thank you to our speaker and to our panelists for this great conversation. And thank you all for joining us. I hope tonight's discussion is the start of many new conversations towards partnerships and dialogue between the realms of AI and sustainability. I would like to thank again our donors, our colleagues at the Institut d'Énergie Trottier, and the many who've worked behind the scenes to make this evening possible. It is a lot of hard work over several months. There are many ways to get involved with TICID. Please contact us or connect with us through our website and look at our online content about future events and so on and so forth. For students in the audience, if you're interested in our master's program, there's information out there on the lobby that you can pick up. And we look forward to hearing from you. So good night, au revoir. And David just told me that there's a really strong forecast for the aurora borealis tonight. So on your way out, if you find a dark spot, look up. You may get lucky. Thank you.